All hail Abraxas Isis Kore. Part 2 here of our earth-shattering Prague dialogue. When I say dialogue, I mean a dialogue between me and she, the great goddess, who has been watching over me and guiding me now, 11 years on. And in that time, my whole penetration into the mysteries of the mothers, starting with the young Cleopatra Isis era, through the Mary Magdalene fascinations, finally maturing into the Persephone plot level, it seems to have been one long continuity leading to Columbia. And as we know, in the city of Washington, D.C., Columbia is represented with the torch, holding the torch, and throughout the city, various Greco-Roman goddesses are in play, such as Athena, and the Muses, in particular Clio, muse of history, riding in the car of history. Now, what shockingly has been revealed is the origin of the whole term car in our context. Car is a Phoenician goddess, a form of Persephone, known as the Kore in more classical mythologies, and is in a sense the symbol of the entire conspiracy started by Samyeza with the mothers long ago. And we have always been falling back now, characterizing all of this as the mother's conspiracy. And that's a quote from our buddy Dr. Jung, who of course has been guiding me along all of this. And it's taken from Goethe's Faust Part 2. Now, in Faust Part 1, which is essentially the story of Edward Kelly and his ilk, because another thing we got to remember here is that when these doubling periods occur, there's essentially an imprinting on the planetary brain. Whoever is on the cutting edge at the time, around this period it was Edward Kelly, they are in the frontier with the machete hacking away at the unknown, you see, and they're creating the footprints that everyone's going to have to follow in. So Edward Kelly's failure at that time sets a pattern, what we could call the Faustian pattern, which determines everything through the Enlightenment and into the next crunch of the spiral as it's going, from the Founding Fathers era into the grid, etc. So, we have to remember that no matter how bad things get, and no matter how catastrophically somebody like Kelly may blow it, there's always a compensation, there's always a course correction which occurs. And the Rosicrucian Enlightenment movement, which was attempted to be fostered by Rudolf II here in Prague, and if Kelly had done his job, would have led to a whole new era of goddess resurgence. Again, that failure, though terrible and bloody and catastrophic for history, course-corrected by the emergence of Freemasonry. The Rosicrucians obviously were never able to come out from behind the veil, as we know, and anyone who studies Rosicrucian history will tell you this, because of the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches going to war against each other, starting with the 30 Years' War, and making the question, which is the best version of Christianity, instead of the question, which is the best cosmic plan? And if that had been the question asked, what is the best cosmic plan, the mistress plan and the mother's mothers would have been the answer. But instead, because of Kelly's failure and because of the geopolitical nonsense of the 30 Years' War, the question became, which is the correct Christianity? That question, of course, was ultimately resolved by Nietzsche, who said, well, it's all a bunch of nonsense. God is dead. They've made each other irrelevant. And here we are in the post-religious future, the dry, empty abyss of the industrial scientific age. So you see that science is opposing religion from the Enlightenment onward only because religion failed to keep magic as part of its balancing force. The fathers forgot the mothers, let's say, and everything had to go into, again, this underground stream philosophy, counterbalancing the chaos of the conscious world in Europe. Peter the Great and the Enlightenment period finally puts this back on track, and we see, finally the American question and the Columbia goddess coming to the fore, and the torch is passed to America. Now, that torch comes out of the Greco-Roman symbology directly, specifically, no matter whose version you want to believe, that's why it's there. It's because of the goddess image from ancient Greece of the torch holding thing. It's the Olympics, ironically, are going on right now as we speak, and they have the torch carrying ceremony going on. And you see, this whole idea of the torch, the light, the enlightenment, it is embodied in the ancient world by the Kore. What is Kore? The Kore, the car, is the product of the mother's mother's conspiracy. It is the daughter, or more specifically, the sister. Instead of thinking of it in terms of mother's mothers, and I'll get right back to Faust and why that was Jung's definition in a moment, but we need to look at it as the sisters. In the Greco-Roman pantheon, the daughters of the god and goddess, the daughters of Zeus and Hera, or Zeus and Demeter, or Poseidon and Demeter, whoever, the daughters are the important figures. And the three most important daughters are Athena, Artemis, and Persephone. And that trinity of goddesses, they're all referred to as Kore. K-O-R-E. In Phoenician, it's Kar, K-A-R, and it is later interpolated in Latin. The K becomes a C, and it becomes Car, C-A-R. And that's why Clio, the muse of history, is riding in the car of history. And what's on the front of the car of history? It's the idea of the torch of liberty, Columbia, moving forward, you see, to meet the car as it's coming. In other words, the car coming out of the unconscious, or from the unknown future in terms of the zodiacal symbolism, is meeting us and saying, okay, do you have the torch? Are you ready to show with the torch and illuminate the final pages that have been waiting to be written? Where does that torch come from? Columbia has it, but where did she get it? She got it from the mistress plan and the sisters. Athena, shown with that torch, is illuminating Athens, ancient Greece, and forming the red team political basis of the democracy type of liberty world that the founding fathers are recreating finally in the United States. The torch is the symbol of the Kore daughter. Hecate and Demeter are the two other goddess figures in the mother's mother's plot, as defined by Faust, as illuminated by Jung. The Kore has one torch, Demeter has two torches, Hecate has three torches. The full symbolism of this and what it means is something I'll illuminate later, but the fact is that that torch is representing the wisdom, the inner light, the all-seeing eye. And that light is what is trying desperately to be brought to the surface. And that light is, you could say, the spark or flame first lit secretly by the Watchers when they came down into the daughters of men. And it's the underground. Why is it a torch? Because you're in the underground, you see. You don't need a torch out in the conscious world because the sun is shining and it's daylight. You're only going to need a torch if you're inside, in the womb of the goddess, inside the underground, you see. So, in the classical myth, Persephone, taken by Hades with the willing collaboration of the earth, because the earth opens up, allows Hades to grab her, the rape of Persephone, take her down, closes up again. She has one torch leading down into the world of the mothers. Demeter, who goes down after her, has the two torches. And she is forming the initiatory pattern which the Eleusinian mysteries are based on. Demeter represents the conscious ego, the world of daylight, descending into the unconscious to find the core, to the core, you could say. The core of the earth, the core. And bringing back out, with spring and the return of Persephone, the enlightenment which has been underground all this time. Hecate and the three torches, I'm just not even going to talk about right now because that's too complex to bring to the table. Of course, Hecate, just let me say quickly, is the primordial mother, the dark mother, who would have been the one who was the earth goddess's representative before the Titans even, before the Olympians. She is the primal chaos mother. She's equivalent to Lilith, you see. Demeter is more of an Eve figure. So the two mothers, dark and light, of Hecate and Demeter are representing the positive and negative of the mistress plan. Both of them are facilitating the resurgence or the return of Persephone, the daughter, the core, from the underworld to bring about the enlightenment of humanity and the humans, which is the entire point of the mistress plan. And it's what Samyeza and the angels, the Grey Elves, have been trying to achieve ever since everything went to hell, literally, during the flood. So, this torch has been passed from Europe to America by the time of the Enlightenment. During Rudolph's time, it's still being held here. And what we got to realize is that even though symbolically the torch has been set up in America with the Statue of Liberty, we got to refer back to the 1881 era and the whole plot level involving the planetary angels. Another thing, my God, I almost forgot to mention. The plot level that I had been so blown away by regarding the planetary angels taking over human history finally in 1881, the grid, etc., the Garfield question, why Garfield had to be assassinated during that time to make up for the grid going wrong. You see, in a way, Joseph Smith's failure is a Faustian failure, which he is repeating because Kelly made the same mistake that Smith did hundreds of years earlier during the previous turning of the wheel. You see, the 1881 plot level was given by Trithemius, who was, as far as I knew, just another unknown monk from the Middle Ages who something came up with some planetary angels plot level. In fact, Trithemius is the most important source for everything happening in the court of Rudolph II. Shockingly, Trithemius is the #1 author that Rudolph, Michael Meyer, Dr. D, Kelly, Giordano Bruno, all these guys just love Trithemius. Why? Because they're trying to facilitate the Grey Elf Samyeza plot, and Trithemius is one of these guys back in the Middle Ages who's got some secret book from the age of Cleopatra that's got the answer telling him what is going to be going on, and his prophecy about the coming age, etc., is just another little bit of dwarf-delivered plot level plopped into his hand. Trithemius, I imagine him sitting in some court in the Middle Ages having conversations with the court dwarf or fool, and shockingly getting told, well, this and this and this, and go to find this library, and you might find this book, and then you'll know everything. And what he finds out is the Samyeza plot level of the planetary angels. So, Trithemius couldn't be more important, and there's no way that it's coincidence in any sense, because everything that Rudolph II, according to the book on the Magic Circle, everything at that plot level of him trying to use the astrological forces, you see, the astrological forces that are supposedly controlling everything from above, these are the planetary angels. Trithemius was talking about how the collective consciousness, although of course he didn't have that term, of Europe was going to resist the movements of the planets during a certain timetable, And then finally, everything's going to come together in a new world, which of course we now know is America. In a new world, see, in Europe they can't resolve the problems, and Trithemius knew that as early as the 12-something-something, or 13-something-something when he was around. He knew that it wasn't going to be resolved. He could sense the problems that were coming. And so his prophecy, which is picked up by Francis Bacon and the Rosicrucians as well, about the new Atlantis, and the whole idea that we have to get the hell out of Europe, and we have to resolve all of our issues by forcing ourselves into a new world order. And that new world order is going to be finally putting the Tower of Babel back together again, in the United States, of course, with the help of the Kouré mysticism. Athena, and that aspect of the Kouré, the Red Team, is prominent in America because of the Red Team plot levels coming to a fore due to the nature of how Islam versus Christianity played out, which is, of course, a direct result of how the Renaissance played out and how it did not lead to unity, instead led to division amongst the Red Team. And again, Kelly could have fixed that and chose not to. Getting back to the main point here is the Trithemius' prophecy about Samyeza and the angels taking over. It has a symbolic power of the planetary spheres intervening in human destiny and shaping events, but only if the right humans at the right time pick up the phone and answer the planetary influences in the correct way. The only correct way to answer the planetary influences is through Kouré, through the Persephone mother's plot. Now, getting back to Faust. Kelly and his error is Faust Part 1, because Kelly's story and the whole Prague Faust plot was the direct inspiration for Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, which was the first version of the Faust legend, and it's the one that most people are most familiar with. Faust gets some kind of Kabbalistic book, conjures up the devil, makes a deal, gets all the great fame and riches, and in the end gets taken to hell. And the Faust house, which Edward Kelly did live in, there supposedly is a hole in the floor that was burned into the floor when Faust was taken to hell by the devil. And they've tried to get rid of the hole, tried to clean it, but it won't become clean because the devil's mark is there. And that mark is a scar left on the planetary brain, not of Faust, but of Kelly. And Kelly leaving behind the dark, failed legacy. That's the hole in the floor that everybody has fallen in, Joseph Smith among them. So, the Faust legend, however, representing the imprint of how things went wrong after the Renaissance, leading us to the 1750 turnover point. It's ironic that right at that time, 1750, Goethe, Mr. Freemasonry Illuminati of Germany, writes Faust Part 1. And Goethe leaves Faust Part 1 where Marlowe's Dr. Faustus ends, with, Faust, having everything go wrong in his life after he's misused the power the devil's given him. But Goethe ends it with a question: is Faust going to be damned or not? Marlowe concluded, of course, looking around at Europe at the time, Faust, i.e. the European man, has blown it. We've sold our souls to the devil, and we've lost it all. Help us out. And however, Goethe, in the Enlightenment period, is a little bit more hopeful. He ends it with a question mark. And then he gets to work on Faust Part 2, which takes him 60 years. Okay? He finishes Faust Part 1 when he's in his 20s. He's 80-something years old by the time he finishes Faust Part 2. And he is at the point, ironically, in history, when Joseph Smith is on the scene. He finishes Faust Part 2 just as the purple column of the grid is coming to its fruition. And what happens in Faust Part 2? Faust, at the beginning of Part 2, when faced with Mephistopheles' question of, are you coming with me to hell or not, descends into the realm of the mothers. You see, here's the cleverness of Goethe's argument, and this is why Jung loved him so much. Well, of course, Jung also loved him because Goethe was his great-grandfather, but that's another story. Faust is given the question by Mephistopheles, "Are you coming to hell?" And Faust answers, "Yes, but I am going to determine how I go to hell." Our contract, you see, this is like the brilliant Enlightenment legal strategy that Faust Part 2 brings to the table. Impossible in the just very primitive lawyer-type atmosphere of the Shakespearean era. Goethe's Faust says, okay, our contract says I have to go to hell. Doesn't say how I have to go, and it doesn't say what's going to happen once I'm there. It just says that I end up there. Okay, so what he does is he descends, and the hell he goes to is the underworld of the mothers. He descends to Persephone. Persephone gives Faust the magic secret that allows him to return to the surface and command Mephistopheles. Because Mephistopheles is ultimately just an imp, just a unconscious, hand reaching up from the underworld to try to draw people like Faust down. Ultimately, it's all being puppeteered by Persephone. And that's what Goethe realizes with the mother's conspiracy. And when Goethe is on his deathbed, okay, he says, "More light." That's his last words, meaning the torch, all right? In an interview he gave a few years before his death, when pressed by some young, Goethe-loving worshiper, what was the secret that Faust got from Persephone that allowed him to control the magic of Mephistopheles? Goethe's response is, the mother's mothers, right? And that is the key mystery that Jung zeroes in on, and it's what allows him, in his analysis of the psyche of Europe and the masculine-dominated, having gone wrong psyche, descending to the realm of the mothers and receiving the light and the wisdom from Persephone, giving you the power as the transformed individual to return and command the forces. That's where the grid puts us, and that's where the apocalyptic countdown crunch begins to take shape. But it's only possible because the Persephone plot has allowed Faust to fix the problems and to answer the questions left unresolved in Part 1, i.e. in Prague and the Renaissance. And so the reason that Persephone is totally in the background in all of the Founding Fathers type plot, all the symbolism in Washington, D.C., all of that, focuses only on the Athena side to Kore, because she is the conscious, above-board version of it, and that's as far as they could go. The underground version still sleeping and still waiting to come out, and that's why Columbia in the ghost capital, still unconscious, still waiting for the Samyeza angelic injection to give her the final secret to make all the pieces of history fit together so that her story can begin. And this is again the purpose of the grid per se. But what occurs is that there's a calendar-dominated conspiracy that is set up going way back in Prague, and it involves the Orloj, as we have seen, the Orloj, which is the Prague clock, which is in the Old Town Square, which is summarizing the angelic forces and the planetary scheme which controls human destiny and which can be seen as essentially cartography of the planetary brain. What happens is, in Rudolph's court, the calendar conspiracy is put into focus. The first official diet, or calling together of representatives from the Holy Roman Empire that Rudolph convenes, is to appoint or to institute the new Gregorian calendar, because we're adjusting the calendar, getting away from the Julian calendar, which was started at the first doubling point by Julius Caesar, and bringing things into a tighter, more accurate to the heavens calendar conspiracy. But we have to remember, calendar conspiracy equals Samyeza and the planetary angels. And the clock, the Prague clock, the Orloj as it's called, is counting down to the apocalypse and is tracking all of these movements. And so the alignment of the calendar politically, the Gregorian calendar, with the plot level overall of the angels is setting a timer, let's say, that Rudolph, and it's even claimed, and I don't even believe it, that Ivan the Terrible attends this meeting where the calendar is discussed. But the point there is, whether or not Ivan the Terrible did, it's foreshadowing the Peter the Great connection, which is going to come in later with the turning of the clock as it goes into the 1700s, the 1750 doubling point, which is when England officially adopts the Gregorian calendar, and the Julian calendar is only being used by Russia at that point. And this is a whole nother background. I'm just name dropping this thing here because I have to follow up on it later. Background to the calendar conspiracy being controlled Masonically to lead us to the apocalyptic final 2012 era. And the idea of Cleo coming at us from the future, demanding with the book for us to write in the last few pages of the entire process. And you can look at the horloge as going off like an alarm bell, trying to remind us of that. So, all of that being on the table, I really have to stress how, I seem to be throwing out so many things here which may not even be comprehensible as I'm rattling them off, but are so key, and all of them fit together and converge in this unfinished business of the alchemical astrological era of Rudolph, being tied in with the goddess having been left hanging by the unfulfilled Samyeza plot due to Kelly's failure, and how the horloge and the planetary angel conspiracy relating to the calendar and the apocalypse, all of that is set up at a crucial focal point here in Prague, and that is where the torch remains. And even though the Freemasonry conspiracy, which again was a course correction, brings the torch to America, brings Columbia there, and she has the torch ready to go, she still is asleep and still is unconscious because the final pieces to the puzzle have yet to be revealed. And this is, of course, where the dwarves and the UFO are coming into play, because you got to remember that the dwarves are here to keep us going, no matter what, no matter how we screw up, and no matter how deeply our error. The dwarves are going to be around to shock troop us back in the direction we need to, because they can't let us fail, because their fate is inextricably tied to ours. So we have figures in the background all over Prague now, dwarf-type figures. They appear in the statuary as the cherubim, which is the small little childlike angels. They're not children any more than the small greys are children. They're the dwarves, and they're in the statuary all over this city, kind of looming and keeping, if I got a grid and I began to break down all the statues and all the classical god references and how it all fits together, you would see a background-foreground relationship of Greco-Roman goddess-god figures counterbalanced by Renaissance-era cherubim. So that you have, as we've seen in all the footage I've been taking, a god and goddess of Greco-Roman style, but they're accompanied by these cherubim. They're next to them, or they're with them in some sense in the statuary, and that's the dwarf connection in the background all the time. And the legends of Prague are dwarf-ridden. There's some suggestion that the famous Rabbi Low, who was the creator of the golem, in the Prague legends, was himself a dwarf living above board as a very small human. So there's a whole nucleus of plot level here that is yet to be taken to the fore, yet to be answered. Questions posed, answers never given. The Freemasonry conspiracy is attempting to set up a platform whereby those answers can be known. Columbia, the torch, the grid, America. But the answers themselves are still unknown, because only Kelly can give us those answers, shockingly. It's his language. He's the one who made the mark. He's the one who created the Faust pattern that has trapped Europe and now America and the New World Order in this schizophrenic stasis regarding the planetary angels plot. Kelly's descendant, Mountford, the reason he couldn't pull the trigger and fix things is because he was operating with bad software. Kelly is like a guy who gives you the computer. You have the computer. Kelly gives you the software, but it's only keyed to his password, okay? But he dies or leaves the scene, and you don't have the password, and all you have is the software, which looks great, and you can use it for some things, but fundamentally it's like discovering a computer and not having access to the control panel. So you can't change any of the settings, you can't alter any of the software, you can't put new programs in. You can do nothing except play what's left on the board, and as we know, frozen at a Renaissance-type era, all we have is Greco-Roman symbology and a planetary angel's undercurrent plot level, but none of it's coherently fit together and none of it comes to a fore where the answers are possible. Freemasonry, in its attempt to rectify this situation, all it can ultimately do is clarify, dust off all the pieces, put them all on the table, have it all ready to go, but ultimately you're sitting there looking at it and saying, but what now? And now is the time for esteemed Mr. Kelly to show up with the answer, but of course, he's been dead and trapped ever since. And so, now we come to the shocking tale, which is unfolding. And I must point out again the incredible power of this city and the incredible force, natural energies, to quote Mike Silva, the natural energies at work here. Because all of it is set up like a magical puzzle ready to be solved. All we have to do is drop the final piece in, and somebody has to approach the goddess forces and make up for Kelly's error. Somebody has to be Faust Part 2 to his Faust Part 1. Well, guess what? Manu! It is the Manu. He shall be Faust Part 2. And we will pause here, and then I will begin with the shocking tale.